Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fine Arts Center's special edition of our Codemakers Artist Conversation series. Today with Kyle Abraham, whose company A.I.M by Kyle Abraham is launching our dance series this fall on October 4th, the dance series of our 24-25 season. And we're super excited to have Kyle with us. Um, so, hello, Kyle. How you doing?
Pretty good. How you feeling?
Okay, hanging in there. Um, gonna give our folks a little bit of a background on you, and then we'll get started with the conversation.
Sounds good.
Um, so, Kyle Abraham is founder and artistic director of A.I.M by Kyle Abraham. He has premiered his work to international audiences and acclaim since 2006. Abraham has been profiled in Document Journal, Vanity Fair, Ebony, Harper's Bazaar, and many other magazines and publications. He's the proud recipient of a National Dance Critics Award for Choreography in 2024 for Are You and Your Feelings with Alvin Ailey Dance Theater. Are You and Your Feelings as well, Dance Magazine Award and Princess Grace Statue Award, Doris Duke Award, and also is a recipient of the MacArthur Fellowship. In addition to performing and developing new works for his company, Abraham has been commissioned by a wide variety of dance companies, including Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, National Ballet of Cuba, New York City Ballet, Paul Taylor American Modern Dance, and the Royal Ballet. In 2024, Kyle will premiere two evening-length works, Cassette Volume 1 in Hamburg, Germany in August, and in December, Dear God, Make Me Beautiful at the Park Avenue Armory in New York City. Abraham has led and curated several performance series, including the Dance Space Project, 2024 50th anniversary season, as well as Lincoln Center's Summer for the City in 2023, 2022, and other years. In 2020, Kyle was the first ever guest editor for Dance Magazine. He also serves as the Claude and Alfred Mann Endowed Professor in Dance at the University of Southern California, Gloria Kaufman School of Dance since 2021, and he also sits on the advisory board for Dance Magazine and Hubbard Street Dance Chicago. He's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the inaugural Black Genius Brain Trust, and the inaugural cohort of the Dorchester Industries Experimental Design Lab, partnership between the Prada Group, the Astrogate Studio, Dorchester Industries, and Rebuild Foundation. So, with all that, again, welcome, Kyle. We're so happy to have you in our season. So, full disclosure, I guess, to the audience, you and I, we met a long time ago. I think so. We were at it was University of Iowa. Your company was performing at Hansher Performances, and I guess public disclosure, we bonded over Prince.
Yes.
Say
The Purple Genius.
Purple Genius. Do you still have that button I gave you? I
I
don't know if
do.
you remember.
I should have worn it. I think it's either in
Well,
my guest room or in my office.
I have a lot of shirts, both ones that I've bought officially through Paisley Park, and then other bootlegs, which are even some of which are even better. Um, but I don't have any. I'm actually on vacation at my mom's house in Los Angeles, so I didn't bring any with me. But anyways, I just always feel the need to shout him out. So.
Yeah.
So to start off, for those in our audience who aren't perhaps familiar with your work already, can we start out a conversation with a brief background of your company and its mission? Can you tell us a little bit about A.I.M by Cal Abraham, and sort of how you sort of see it in the world, and why you even started a company? That's a big responsibility.
Yeah, those are big questions. The start of the kind of new year. I live in school years. I think having parents that work in the school system and now myself kind of being involved in the school system, I just always looking at this time of year as like these fresh starts in some way. So there's some of these questions I'm asking myself, these things you want to be asking yourself every year, like, why am I doing what am I doing? Like, what is the things that drive me? But having, a company was always something that I was interested in from the start of actually studying dance in a more kind of codified way. I just loved the possibilities of building something with a group of people, and really kind of building a world, a vocabulary, a community, um, and kind of continue to honor a lot of the ways in which I have been inspired, both in my community, but also looking at the dance lens as well. So over the years, the company first started when I was in graduate school, primarily doing my work, choreography by me, and then probably around 20, when was that? 2018, I think, was our first season where we had guest artists. And that season, I think, was first with we had Doug Verone and BB Miller and Andrea Miller. Um, and then the following year, Kirati Jinakumipot was also added to the mix. So really just thinking about these great kind of intergenerational conversations we can be having with our field in some way, really looking at my influences and trying to make sure I can honor them and say, okay, well, if you like what I do, is in the same way as people who look at liner notes for albums, they can kind of see who was involved in an album and then hopefully follow those artists in some way or see where those inspirations come from. So that's a big part of what I do. I love thinking about how to kind of honor legacy and all those artists that came before me, and also acknowledge the next generations that we have as well. In a Karate Jinakwe Potter or even Arena Butler, both former dancers with AIM, but great dance makers in their own right. So it's definitely part of what I'm interested in doing, and I love, as you mentioned before, and with the bio, I love having opportunities to present both an evening length work, so a work that spans a little over an hour in length, depending, and also these repertory works, which is what we're doing with you. So these works that kind of shorter, different works that make up an evening and tell their own stories, or purposely don't tell any stories, but make up an evening in a fun kind of nuanced way to kind of give an audience different tastes and different worlds over the course of an evening of dance.
Cool. Um, so kind of delving more a little bit into that background, you mentioned being a student and starting the company then. Um, so I'm curious kind of what makes you tick as an artist. Wondering if you can kind of give us a one or two tidbits or highlights in basically how you got here or this period of your life or your career from where you started. The journey from being a young person aspiring to a life in the arts or in dance to where you are now.
Yeah, I'm always there's always something that's inspiring in some way, shape, or form. I tend to, in some ways, make work that either intentionally or unintentionally is kind of looking 20 years back. I think when you look at works like Pavement, which premiered in 2012, it was in some ways looking at John Singleton's film Boys in the Hood, which was, came out in 91, 92. So that's 20 years prior. Um, or, some of these even recent works like this work Cassette that you mentioned, which, I guess at times it's just a little bit over 20 years, but I've been focusing primarily on music from 1983 to 93. And I kind of realized what that was just the other day talking to some donors. I was like, oh, 1983 was the year I got kicked out of Catholic school for dance. Like, oh yeah, my first day in Catholic school, I got kicked out of school. I never went back. And it's funny, for dance. And I like never danced again in that kind of way. And then 1993 is the year I told my mother I wanted to dance. So it's been interesting to kind of be finding this out while making this work. So that's been fun. But that's a lot of kind of the origins of it for me. I think like I'm a very sensitive person. Hopefully in the best ways. There's some ways that people look at that as a negative. But I'm very I don't know. I'm very heightened by things around me or memories or the energies around me. So that can always come into what it is I'm making. And sometimes it's also the most mundane television that I'm watching that makes its way into a work. Love Island and Love Island UK made their way into an Untitled Love, which is a work celebrating the music of D'Angelo. And for me, trying to make a work that's looking at relationships as someone who's been single much longer than I wish I could say. I really wanted to look at what are these young people talking about? What are the kind of tensions that exist in these younger relationships? And so I went to those shows to kind of like give me a little something. Um, and I'm still watching them today. I gotta say. Talkbacks. So yeah, watching it. I'm watching it. So we do the next talkback. Yeah.
Well, I said I was staying with my mom. I get my reality TV shows updates from my mom. She's very much looking forward to the 3 hour finale of what is it the latest Bachelor or whatever it is. See, I don't
Oh,
even know.
like the Golden Bachelor or something. Is
What?
it the Golden Bachelor?
Oh no, she loved that one too. She very much loved
Okay.
that one. Well, do you ever feel so? Speaking of generations, I mean, I love because I'm older than you even, and I I wonder if younger folks even know what a cassette or liner notes or sometimes even what an album is. Like what if I sometimes I say album to people and they think I'm talking about vinyl.
All right.
It's not even like a concept, this
Yeah.
kind of holistic
Yeah.
thing anymore.
I mean, it's barely even singles culture, which is interesting. It's
Right,
just so fast food.
right, right. Um, so I'm curious about the relationship between yourself as a dancer and as a choreographer. The vocabulary and technique, for example, that many choreographers throughout history that they develop are rooted in how those folks individually move or feel through the movement, whereas some other choreographers are a little headier about it and maybe apply a more intellectual or objectified construct to their choreography, to their dance, and to their dancers. Um, and then also, of course, some folks dance a lot in their work and some stay away from the stage. You have gone from being in many of your earlier works to, I think in the recent years, more sporadically performing. So can you talk about your development of your practice as both a dancer and the choreographer and kind of the relationship between the two?
Yeah, sure. I feel like I'm like option D in all those worlds you were bringing up. Um, I sometimes there are things that I need to say myself from my body, and there's other times where that's the last thing I want to do. It's also challenging for me if I'm considering putting myself in something, and then I put material on my dancers, and they look much better than me doing it, and then I'm like, I never want to do that ever again. That's happened several times with Tamisha, a guy who's danced for my company for over 10 plus years. Maybe I'll make something for the both of us to do, and then she does it. I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna sit this one out you know. But I don't know. It's hard to say. I think like my show at the Armory in December, I'm supposed to be dancing in that one, which is ironic because a lot of it is looking at aging, so it makes sense that I should be in it with my like 20 somethings. And I think that's part of the picking and choosing of when I'm physically dancing in a work or present in any capacity is am I needed in the work? Do I need to physically have my body in the space? I think works like an Untitled Love, the one I was saying, rooted in D'Angelo's music. I made like 90% of, if not more, 95, 96% of every step that the audience is seeing and the text that's you're hearing. So I feel very much in the work, but I didn't feel like I needed to be in the piece. One of my dancers at the time was like, Kyle, don't you want to, can you play a janitor in the piece? I was like, I don't think that's needed. I don't think, I mean, it is part of it, and it's this thing, I was talking to the dancers um, just this past week about my place in the company right now and really the challenges that I'm experiencing as both the kind of like namesake choreographer and director of this company. Because the thing that people forget all the time is when you are in that role, you get older and the company gets younger. And
Oh yeah.
that is challenging. And it's also challenging in the kind of 2020ness of, kind of just how the whole dance landscape is shifting and changing in all of the ways. I think dancers today, even if they have 52-week contracts and they're like taken care of financially in some way, still are hungry to do other things and will want the time to do X, Y, and Z, or they want to um, focus more on themselves more than a company. And I'm not saying that in any way to say it's a bad thing or a good thing. I just say that it's different. I felt like before it used to be like when you thought about the Cunningham Company and its legacy, it was about the Cunningham Company. Yes, you could talk about dancers and these ones that stood out, but it wasn't necessarily, um, I don't know, it was still about this thing. And I think you saw that in a lot of those companies that, lasted for a very long time, that it was really about that overall kind of mission. And so I think I'm in this place learning how to be in the space,
Mhm.
how to share space, how to be in communication. Also, ironically, being in communication with a generation that doesn't actually, like, they don't talk in the same way. They're not on phone calls in the same way that my generation was or yours was. It's text messages and memes or emojis. Like, you ask a question, a lot of times you're not going to get a word answer. You're going to get a like on the message. And so it's trying to kind of figure out my way within that. Although I feel like I veered from the question, this is still the root of kind of how I figure out how I am in a work. There's obviously a different type of separation when I'm commissioned by someone else to make a work, because the roles are that much clearer in terms of where how much time I have with these artists that I'm collaborating with, how much I get to know them, um, how much interest it is on both sides for us to get to know each other. Um, yeah, all of those things are part of the conversation. And dancers, I think, in some of these commission works could potentially bow out if they didn't want to do the work. I think when you're working for, if they're working for me, I don't know if they feel they have that kind of autonomy to kind of like bow out of my work if they wanted to. Um, who's to know? So all of that is kind of on my heart when I'm thinking about what I'm making and how I'm making it. Um, yeah.
Yeah. The that mode of communication is a, I mean, as you know, I'm a dance theater artist as well, but I'm also a presenter. And, with both of those hats on, I'm thinking about this issue all the time. What performance, what live even means to younger folks is, I think it's been a paradigm shift. It's a very different thing, like fundamentally, between, definitely from Z back to X and prior, but even, millennials, they still sort of inherited a lot of that sense of what the world is or what the world's supposed to be. And I feel like this youngest generation now of folks coming up, late teens and into their 20s, they're in the business of redefining what the world is and what it's supposed to be. I remember going to see. So speaking of Prince again, he said he was telling the audience, because everybody had their phones out, and he was like, um, when I was your age, we had to call each other beforehand how we were going to meet up at the club or at the show. Um, and so his point was, for us, it was effort, and it was much more of a kind of like long ritual that was hours or days even, in a different way, because time wasn't compressed like it is now. And so, yeah, I feel that tension, between sort of how sort of more established dance makers and artists are creating work for multiple generations right now. Um, Speaking of a multiplicity of artists creating work for for a multiplicity of generations now, we have our season. We Fine Arts Center is, a pretty typical performing arts center, in a regional geographic area. We do, dance, music, theater, film everything for a pretty broad spectrum of audiences and constituencies. And in a time, mid or late 2024, going into 2025, when in this country things are still sort of tearing at the seams. And there's a lot, I mean, it's, beyond cliche now, unfortunately, to say that there's a lot of divisiveness, there's a lot um, of strife. And um, so our season focus, our theme is communion, community, connection, multiplicity, dialogue. How we sometimes are able to come together, find ourselves coming apart and having to put ourselves back together, but without knowing how. Um, our marketing director blew my mind when he showed me the brochure draft, because I told him all this, but I couldn't find the right words for it. And he came up with a title of All Rise. And when I saw that, I was just blown away. And I thought, that's it, that's our theme. So um, the next thing, honestly, after that moment, which is why I mentioned it, I thought how perfect it was going to be to have your company as our second main stage performance this fall on October 4th. Because when I watch your dance, the emotion I have so often is that all your dancers, that all of us in the audience are sort of finding ourselves in a situation where we have to rise to the occasion. In your work, as you said, you're a very sensitive person, and I think that really comes through, for me, anyways. In your dance, there's always pain surrounding desire, or melancholy surrounding, like like a core of optimism. I don't know if that's the right word, but more than just about your mission as an artist. I think about how any artist, you in this case, are feeling these days about yourself, about your identity, about the folks around you, the folks you care about, or that we all care about. And how's the feeling of this moment coming through in your work these days?
Hmm. Um, I'm not sure if I know, honestly. I mean, I think maybe when I get back into this armory work, I mean, I think everything is built with that kind of sensitivity that you're talking about and I'm talking about. I mean, this repertory program, I think there's a lot of love in in this program, as we're kind of like thinking about which works are kind of going to make it to the stage for your audience. Um, I think there's some ideas of like Black futurism in some way, and Rena Butler's work, that's really powerful and in a way that's like freeing while also it's present in its futureness. Um, I think you get some hope in the work of Kirati Jinakumipat. Like there's a lovely sense of community within that. And I think for some of the works that I'm kind of exploring, I think Motor Rover might be on the program. And for me, Motor Rover is an opportunity for an audience to really look in at the movement and a little doses of humanity and humor, um, with silence built in. It's a work that's inspired by Merce Cunningham's work Land Rover, which is a larger work for his company. And this work Motor Rover is in some ways a response to it, but very much from my perspective. So it's pulling in my influences of Cunningham technique as well as other techniques and the like. But you get you get a good dose of me in there. So I don't know. I think this idea. So there's space for hope in the program, and for people to see like people in the space and to feel a sense of empowerment from the artists on stage. Um, as I was saying, a lot of this work is referencing a time before, and part of the conversations that have come up with me and the dancers, looking at a work like Cassette, in particular, because it just premiered and we do it over this way in a few weeks, is that growing up, not to say that I was sheltered, but I felt so loved by my parents that if you were to ask me, at some other point in life, whether or not there was a lot of war or divisiveness, etc., in the 80s, I would have been like, oh, everybody loved everybody, which is so not true. So not true. You watch some of the films from the 80s that like brought me so much joy, and there's so many cringe moments in those films for everybody. Um, and so it's interesting for me thinking about a then versus now and making work that is rooted in this idea of nostalgia, because it's a tricky thing, nostalgia. Um, so there's, and I think there's a bit of that in a lot of the works that I do make over time. Um, but in this newer work for the Armory, Dear Lord, Make Me Beautiful, that work is in some ways much more present than anything I've made in a long time. So there is, I don't know, there's a certain kind of sadness that I feel like I live in and kind of jostlate when I am in that particular headspace. That is a little challenging, because for that the course of that day we rehearse 10 to 6 every day, give or take, because we have a class for an hour and some change before we go into rehearsals. um, to be trying to have that kind of sensitivity, um, like so close to my head and heart and body, to physicalize something is really a hard task, to also make sure that everyone in the space is having a good time when you're making something with that kind of tingle and sensation.
Yeah. Um, your thank you for that. That was beautiful. So speaking of the program, yeah, you referenced a couple of the folks on the program. We have Rena Butler's "Shell of a Shell of the Shell."
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have um, "Someday Soon" by Kirati. I'm forgetting how to pronounce her last.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Kirati Jinakuli. Yeah.
um, which I watched the. I haven't seen the full piece yet myself. I'm looking forward to it, but I did watch the. Your company has a kind of behind the scenes making of video, and she was speaking of, um, kind of trying to come up with a way to celebrate folks and to give them their moment, give them their flowers, and this idea of, when it's catching, because timing is everything in life, right? And catching people, catching oneself, one's spirit at just the right moment, and how you share that together. That's the vibe I get from that piece. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that, and I guess the role of having other choreographers uh, in your work for your company?
Sure, I'm gonna try my best. It's been interesting watching Kirati's journey as a dance maker, separate from her beautiful career as a dancer as well. The first work that she made for the company, Big Rings, as I was saying, I think it was 2019. And it got really really lovely kind of reviews and acknowledgments, and she went on to be on the cover of Dance Magazine's 25 to Watch, and choreograph for companies like New York City Ballet. So it was great to be able to have her come back in and make a second work for the company. And I think going into that, it's always a tricky thing, right? Like, okay, how do I make something different, but also still keeps this idea of like my stamp and my voice as she's continued to emerge as a dance maker. Um, I think for her, probably in this time, she was starting to kind of transition herself from dancing with the company full time, while also making these other works. So I think for her, there was time for her to really look at her peers and collaborators in the space and think about how she really wanted to show them and love on them for the course of the work. Um, Even bring in, previous company members to lend their vocals to the music that you'll hear, to support Someday Soon. Vincent Fairley Jr., amazing vocalist who danced for A.I.M for a good while, is doing some of the vocals for Someday Soon. Um, so it's a beautiful kind of like about face, I guess you'd say, kind of seeing this full circle moment for her in this work and finding the space to continue to celebrate the dancers. I felt like you saw a little bit of that in Big Rings. I feel like she was saying that she felt like the dancers were kind of like superheroes, in a way. And so for this work, just wanting them to all feel kind of loved and having this idea of like these fleeting moments was really important to her. This idea of repertory, I think ironically it first started years ago. I wanted to make this program with I don't it's tricky because I still want this program to happen, so I don't want to say what it was going to consist of. But I wanted to have this program back in like 2013 or 14, where I brought together a lot of different dance styles and techniques from other choreographers into the fold, partially because the dancers at that time were really interested in repertory and having more than one cast. Ironically, those dancers all left before before I got a chance to do that, and then the dancers that were here were like, I don't know if we wanted to be doing repertory. Um, but it's all been part of this idea of celebrating these ideas of past, present, and future. So, first bringing in artists like B.B. Miller and Doug Verone. For me, it was, Doug's work I first saw when I auditioned for SUNY Purchase. And it was a work called Strict Love, which was the work that I saw when I auditioned for Purchase. But also, I felt like there were interesting parallels for my audience who had maybe seen works of mine called The Radio Show, which used old soul music like you get some Dionne Warwick, you get the Shirelles, the Velvelettes, and all that kind of stuff, and you get a sense of that in Strict Love with the Diana Ross and Supremes, and kind of drawing those connections sonically as well as from a movement perspective. BB Miller is one of my favorite kind of writers, choreographers, performers, artists, goddesses. So it's been important for me to make sure that her world stays heavenly in the mouths and the eyes and the ears of anyone and everyone that's connected to my work, because she's made such a huge impact on me. I do want to make space to also kind of look at people that may be around my age group as well, because you need to hopefully be inspired by the people you're talking to and that you're engaging with that are closer in age. So you see a little bit of that sometimes with we've brought in Andrea Miller's work several times. She has new work on the company called Year, and her first work for the company was called State several years ago. And I really love the what comes out of the collaboration with her and my dancers. And then you get to artists like Rena Butler, Akirati Janakumipad, or Malik Washington. It's not about the fact that they dance for my company. It's kind of like just following where they are as dance makers. And that was important for me to kind of acknowledge, looking at this kind of the quotes on it, next generation, or that's supposed to mean, but a generation or two past me. How are we looking at the future? And wanting to give them space and opportunity to kind of, in some ways, come back home and make work at AIM, but also just think about how can we look to these new voices in our field. Paul Singh is, I guess, another artist that I would kind of put really in my generation. But ironically, I feel like he's having a really great, I don't want to say resurgence, but like having this new kind of fire underneath him to kind of be making more than I think he had before for companies in particular. We have two works of Paul's that have joined our repertory. One of them is called Gesture Two Wrists, which I think is maybe on our program,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I'm slightly obsessed. And it's actually from seeing the way Paul was kind of working with the full company while he was auditioning the dancers for Gesture Tourist that made me want to think about what it would be like for him to make a full ensemble work. So I asked Paul to make a new work for the company as well. So it's just great to kind of be able to have all of these works in conversation, not only with my work, but for me, with the dancers, giving them opportunities to learn new tools, new pathways, and think about how to find new I don't know, new seasoning for the dance makers and dancers and change makers that they want to be and or are.
Cool. That's beautiful. And I love that this speaks to, I think, your care about dance, about people, about legacy, and about passing it on. So thank you. Want to get also now into kind of a little deeper unpack how your work addresses issues of race and sexual identity. Your the lead statement sentence in your company mission is quote, "The mission of A.I.M by Kyle Abraham is to create a body of dance-based work that is galvanized by Black culture and history and features the rich tapestry of Black and queer stories," unquote. So I often feel that your work does exactly that. It manages to ride the line between its inherent Blackness, but also what I would characterize as the white gaze, because I mean, to put it simply, you're a very successful dance artist at this point, and you're navigating so many worlds, and therefore, I think so many lenses and gazes in different audiences across America, across internationally. Um, and you mentioned Motor Rover before, so I look at that as for example, which again, Kyle's company will be performing on our stage on October 4th, references Merce's Land Rover from 1972. That original piece delved into, among other things, Merce's view of the American landscape through the dancing body. But that was also a mid 20th century white body, and in that sort of high postmodern era of framing it in a fairly distant, objectified manner. You don't do that. Again, you're a very sensitive artist and person. Your dancers, the duet, the two dancers in the work, while they establish on stage for the audience that Cunningham technique and style in the piece, and I think the silence also feeds into that kind of seeming superficial, seeming objectification, but they also then move into gestures and poses and some sway and some swagger that, to my eyes, reads very clearly as rooted in a kind of Black queerness, and that also claims its power there, its subjectivity, and I think that's, for me, when I watch that, that's where it gets its energy and its kind of effectiveness. So I see that in a lot of your work. I went to see Requiem, Fire in the Air of Earth, when your company presented it in Boston. And for those viewers right now who don't know it, Kyle and the amazing contemporary composer Jalen took on one of the sacred cows of the classical canon, Mozart's Requiem, but really kind of remixed it, reimagined it through, and filtered it, I think, through yourselves. And you express self. What I saw is a range of individuals on stage expressing themselves within a range of their own sort of emotions, but also this. I felt very much that sort of classical Euro-American gaze onto it. There was an interracial couple, an elderly, not elderly, but an older middle-aged couple sitting next to me in the audience, and the husband, who was white, and then most of the white folks in the audience, when the show ended, leapt to their feet and were you know just showering joy and applause, and the black folks. I saw a range of reactions from the black folks, not that they didn't like it. I think they really appreciated it, but it was like that coolness
Uh-huh.
of like, okay, I see what's happening, and I'm seeing how things navigate. And as I'm not black, but coming from the Asian American perspective, myself and a lot of other artists, we also have to deal with that, those sort of things, those perceptions, that are projected upon us. And so I'm just curious how you, as all that, sorry, is a long-winded way of asking how you, as a contemporary Black queer dance maker, sort of navigate all of the complicated worlds that you do, because I think you do it magnificently. So I'm just curious how you do it.
Thanks. Um, I don't. I don't. I think I try my best to make sure that I am present in whatever it is I'm making. Um, and I think even as someone who can be as melancholic as I can be and as serious as I can be, I do try and find moments of levity in whatever it is I'm doing, um, and maybe a little bit of the ridiculous. I mean, I think like Requiem to me is really ridiculous. It's like it's very camp to me, you know, and I'm here for it. It's like, you know, this is not to be a tangent, but I think about the first Batman, the with Prince during the soundtrack, and it is high camp, but it's also like dark, and there's like a point to so much of that movie. There's like messages within that, and I'm interested in all of that. I think like I'm interested in finding space for us to find joy, for us to acknowledge where we're at. Like making a work like An Untitled Love. I wanted to make something where we could celebrate our cultures, our communities, and feel loved upon. But I also need to make sure I can have at least one moment to say, yes, and we're still being shot. um, like we can celebrate and love on each other, but we still, as a community, feel like in so many spaces when we are celebrating that there's still a bit of fear around how loud we can be or how much space we can take up. And in some of the works, there is that somber tone. In other cases, there's hopefully a kind of like provocation of kind of unabashed queerness and blackness in the same time. And even saying that, those two things do not always work hand in hand by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot of kind of fraught tensions within those two kind of um, communities or like cultures, etc. If you choose to kind of splice them in some way. I mean, obviously, queer culture manifests and makes its way into everything that's in the fabric of this world, as does Black culture and Asian culture. But I think these things are these things that like people choose to separate however they can, whatever they can, to kind of get by. Um, but to the question all the more, yeah, I don't feel I don't necessarily feel responsible for anything other than hopefully making the space for um, anyone who has any ounce of history or experience relative to mine to make sure whatever I'm sharing with that lens is as authentic as possible. Everyone, anyone, and everyone is welcome. Um, like I think one of my favorite um, kind of memories of something that happened at one of our shows is we did this show at the Joyce Theater in 2019, and I remember someone stayed for the post performance discussion, and they said something like, "I came to this theater for dance, not for politics." And I said, "Oh, that's amazing! You got both. You got two for one. Isn't that amazing?" Of course, they like were trying to be on their high, like trying to give us their best to make America great. But I was like, sure, you wind up getting even more than you'd hoped for. And I think that's part of what we do. Like if dance is in any way a reflection of art, and then is to be in any way a reflection of society, you need to also kind of go about that kind of sharing with a responsibility and acknowledgement of how you are seeing the world and or how you maybe hope to see the world. Um, and ironically, uh, if I choose to make a work as abstract as I want to, I know that being a Black dance maker, there's already this thing put on the work that politicizes it, even if I'm just making a work about my fiddle leaf tree. you know, Granted, Merce had that power to make a work and not have anyone say that it's about X, Y, and Z. We do not have that same freedom and power, nor will I probably ever. And I'm not saying that in any way as a boo hoo hoo. It's just something I have to just acknowledge.
Right. Right. Um, yeah, I feel like, um, you know, non-white BIPOC dance artists get it coming and going. I mean, so much of the current contemporary dance world across the sort of Euro-American circuit, um, you you're damned if you do and damned if you don't in some ways, because you as you just articulated, the we don't get that privilege of saying, well, my work is just about this. I am just, quote, interested in XYZ, because, well, because then there's also this implicit, thing of like, well, aren't you this and aren't you that, and what does that mean? And but that's for us to know and to understand, to say. And so again, how you navigate that is, I'm just kind of in awe, so thank you for that. um, Kind of starting to wrap up, as an educator, I'm curious, how you've spent a lot of years, also, as working in higher ed. You, in speaking about your work in interviews and in writing, you very regularly cite your early days as a student, and so it seems to me that, um, you know, educational, and learning, lineage is a big deal for you. And I'm just curious, what it means for you to be a dance educator.
Oh my God, I love it. I love my students. I think teaching more than anything comes with a natural kind of reciprocity. Like, and you can see the wheels turning, and you can see, this, you can see the kind of hope. Like, there's hope there in these. I don't mean to belittle it by saying young people, because they are much younger than me. But when you have these questions, or fears around the future, and you see the way that they show up for each other, it's a really beautiful thing. So I love that. I love being able, I'm kind of a matchmaker at heart, and I love being able to do that from a dance perspective. I spent a lot of time in libraries growing up too. So, like, there's a love for research and shared research and recommendations, and saying to dancers, oh, if you like this artist, maybe you should look at this one. Or I see them making a work that is maybe unintentionally derivative to something else that we know from the dance canon. I want to make sure that they know maybe someone that might have made something similar 10 years, 20 years, 40 years before, just so they're aware. And that hopefully makes them hungry to kind of do more research. And it's not to change what it is they're making, but just so they can be operating with that awareness and that history and knowledge, and make them that much more inquisitive about what they're doing and how they're doing it. Um, it's also, as someone who's gone through therapy, and hopefully everyone in this world has at some point, I think that it's my job. I know that it's my job as an educator to not tell someone what to do, but to help guide them towards those things. So I love making the space and figuring out the right questions to ask my students, so that they can find the things for themselves. I love it. Um, yeah, it just brings me so much joy. I just even love, when I'm teaching, at the Gloria Kaufman School at USC. There are these kind of what do you call them? Like those observatory kind of things where you can kind of sit and watch classes from. So sometimes I'm just eating my lunch and I'm just watching them. Sometimes I definitely have some corrections that I'm like, oh, I wonder if they think about this thing. But more than offering that, I just want to see how they learn in other spaces, and what can I add to their journey in the 4 years or more of their dance life. I'm someone who stays in touch with the majority of my students. Anyone who wants to stay in contact, mostly we do stay in touch, because it's a lifelong commitment, as you know, being a teacher or educator in some capacity. So I love it. I really love it. I love all my jobs, sure, but if I'm keeping it 100, teaching is definitely, you know, very, very close to the top of that list. Yeah.
Cool. I love hearing that, because, also knowing that you teach in an institution like Gloria Kaufman School of Dance at USC, which is an amazing institution, and also kind of has this, built up reputation as sort of like, I don't know, I think the shorthand in our community is sort of Juilliard West. Um,
Oh,
sort of vibe. This very very much this idea of a standard of excellence, which in the West, I say that because in the West, it's you still have the weight, some would even say baggage of that classical Western ballet, modern dance, postmodern, contemporary, dance legacy and lineage. And what you're talking about, I think, foundationally, fundamentally, is a different construct, is a different lens, a different framing about and a relationship to the self. It's not prescriptive, like so much of that classical and modern lineage is. And um, and I'm just imagining that your students, appreciate that. At the same time, they're going, why is he asking me these things? What am I supposed to do? Why doesn't he
Well,
just tell me what to do? Because, but that's not about that.
yeah, I was at UCLA, I was at UCLA for 5 years, and when I was there, especially in the kind of teaching choreography classes and the composition classes, I would always let them know, like, whatever the assignment is, I don't really care if you want to have a a codified form to whatever it is. So however you're taking that assignment, go for it. But I'm going to judge it on its composition. And for me, the big thing that I would always say to them is, I don't really, whatever you want to do, if you want to be making dances for competitions, that's awesome, but be the best. If you want to be making dances in this spaces or that space, you want to be making Bharatanatyam dance and put that on stage, sure, just be the best. And that is where I really want to push dancers. It's not, to me, it's not about form in that way. It's about form and breaking the form and all the things, but it's not about any specific style and trying to say that whatever it is you're composing needs to be in that way. Because as a fellow Prince fan, we know he was someone that just loved music. He loved music. It wasn't about it being, sure. We know that he collaborated with Miles Davis. We know he, would, get on with this person or that person. It was music and just someone who loved music. And I love dance. So I just geek out on it however I can.
Yeah. My favorite, what I think two of my favorite things about Prince. These are probably totally anecdotes, but that's where side tangents. But that's where we are in the interview. How he wanted he created the revolution to be his own version of Fleetwood Mac, and also because, as we know, he was a basketball head, and he could hoop, and he really thought of playing his band like coaching a basketball team. Everybody had their own strengths, and it was how that interplay of elements could be orchestrated and arranged. So I don't know. I guess I'm also saying that because I'm sensing a lot of how you arrange so many things in your career and your life in that way. So
I'm
just
the
finally,
coach.
sorry, go
Son,
ahead.
son of a coach, so there's that.
Oh, okay. There you go. So finally, what's next for you? Where are you at, and what are you looking for as your next step? Perhaps is another way to ask that question.
Well, I have a lot of ballets going on right now. I think right after this performance with you, I have some ballets that go up. American Ballet Theater premieres a new work of mine October 16th, and then the Royal Ballet goes back up like I think the following week, maybe the 22nd of October in London. So I'm kind of like going back and forth on those works, as well as the Armory project that I have in December, which is a bigger work with 16 dancers and live music, working with Hawaiian music, amazing composers and musicians. Yeah, I'm just kind of like focus on a lot of those things, and I'll go back to City Ballet in the spring for a new stage work for them. I'm just trying to navigate all of the things as best I can, and really at this point make the space to think about really how do I see my future, and like how can I how can I cultivate joy and happiness for me, more than not more than separate from how I would do those things for other people, because I am notorious for focusing on trying to make everyone around me happy and feel safe and secure and loved upon. And I need to make the space to do that to myself and really figure out what that means. So that's part of my journey in this school year.
Cool. Well, thank you again for your time, for your beautiful thoughts, words, energy, spirit. We are so happy to host your company this season. And Again, for audiences, aimed by Kyle Abraham at the Frederick C. Tillis Performance Hall in the Randolph W. Bromry Center for the Arts on the campus of UMass Amherst on Friday, October 4th at 8 p.m. You can get tickets at fineartscenter.com or fac.umass.edu, and we hope to see you there.